The street was quiet that evening. Too quiet for a part of the city that usually throbbed with noise, vendors calling out, children running across lanes, stray dogs barking in the distance. But tonight, an uneasy silence seemed to hang in the air as though the whole neighborhood knew something was about to happen. Something that would tear away the thin curtain of normalcy. A police officer, dressed in his crisp uniform, though sweat stained the collar, approached the weather-beaten house at the end of the alley. A house that carried with it a dark reputation, one that people crossed the street to avoid, whispering about drugs, shady meetings, and lost lives. He came with a mission, one he believed was righteous: to seal this house, to make an example out of the woman inside who was accused of running narcotics from behind those faded walls. With heavy steps and an authority-laden voice, he knocked on the peeling wooden door, declaring loudly that her time was up. The woman opened it slowly, her face half lit by the dim bulb in the hallway, her expression calm, disturbingly calm for someone who was supposedly cornered by the law. "You must allow us to seal this place," the officer said firmly, his tone hard, but her eyes did not show fear. Instead, there was something else. Knowledge, confidence, a secret burning behind her calm smile. What the officer didn't know, what he couldn't have guessed, was that this woman was no ordinary drug addict, no common criminal. She was an ISI operative, carefully planted and disguised, trained to appear vulnerable, yet deadly in silence, a spider weaving her web while fools like him walked straight into it. She welcomed him inside, almost too politely, and offered him water, which he refused at first, then reluctantly accepted, his instincts confused by her composure. He expected panic, resistance, denial, maybe even tears, but what he found instead unsettled him. She seemed to know why he was there before he even said a word. As he moved around the room, glancing at papers, shelves, and boxes stacked in corners, she began to speak in a low voice, talking about packages that had passed through, about routes used by couriers, about a man who was supposed to be the next target. The officer froze. How could she know that? That name, that detail. It wasn't in any official report. It wasn't public knowledge. Only someone with deep access, someone connected, could know those things. And then came the most terrifying realization of all. The man she was describing as the next target was him. His own shadow seemed to fall heavy upon him as she leaned closer, her words precise, her gaze piercing, recounting details about his life that no stranger should know. Late-night meetings where he thought he was unseen. The envelopes of money he had slid across grimy tables in dark cafes, the favors he had done for people whose names he never dared to write down. He had believed he was careful, invisible even, but here she was, exposing every hidden part of him as if she had been there all along. His throat went dry, his heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst through his uniform, and sweat trickled down his temple as the room seemed to close in around him. She smiled, not kindly but knowingly, the smile of a hunter who has cornered prey without lifting a finger. He tried to muster authority, to remind her who he was, but his voice cracked. His badge suddenly felt like a piece of useless metal, and the words that left his mouth were empty, hollow, meaningless in the face of her silence. I came here to do my duty," he stammered, but she only tilted her head, her eyes never leaving his face, her silence sharper than any blade. And then, with subtle movements, she revealed just enough to make him understand. This house was not a drug den. It was a trap, a carefully constructed theater designed to expose men like him. The narcotics were only a cover story, a mask to lure the curious and the corrupt, and he had walked straight into it. He was not there to seal her house. He was there to have his own fate sealed. His mind raced back to every mistake, every meeting, every secret bribe, and the realization crashed down on him like a storm. The game was never about her, it was always about him. She leaned forward just slightly, her whisper cutting through. the silence. You are the target. The words struck him harder than any gunshot. His knees weakened. His confidence shattered. And for the first time in years, the policeman felt naked, powerless, caught in a net he couldn't break. Desperation filled him, and in a trembling voice he begged, "Please, forgive me." But forgiveness was not hers to give. She was not there to save him, but to expose him, to hand him over to forces much larger than himself, and with one silent signal, just a flicker of her hand, she confirmed to the unseen watchers outside that the prey had been captured. He stood trembling in his own sweat, the realization burning in his chest. The law he thought he carried was nothing but paper, his authority an illusion, and now he was just another name crossed off a hidden list, another pawn swallowed by the shadows. And as the dim bulb flickered above them, he knew his story had already ended before he even walked through that door. The night did not end for the policeman when he walked into that trap. In fact, it was only the beginning of a deeper descent into a world he never thought he would see so closely, a world where shadows ruled and loyalty was a mask worn only to be torn away at the right moment. When he left the woman's house, his body shaking as though he had aged 10 years in an hour, he told himself that perhaps it had been a nightmare, that perhaps her words were meant only to scare him. But in the hours that followed, every sound of footsteps behind him felt heavier. Every ring of his phone made his blood run cold. Every passing face seemed to know too much. He tried to drown the thought by reminding himself that he was still the police, still the one with a badge, a gun, and a system behind him, but the woman's whisper echoed relentlessly in his mind. You are the target. He could not erase it, no matter how hard he tried. That night, as he lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, the city's noises outside muffled and distant, he thought he saw shadows moving in his own room. He sat up, sweating, grabbing his pistol, but there was nothing there. Still, his nerves were on fire, his breath shallow, and his thoughts like a whirlwind. By morning, he decided he would confront her again, demand answers, perhaps even arrest her. But when he returned to the house, it was silent, abandoned, as if no one had lived there for years. Windows boarded up, doors locked, dust on the steps. His head spun. Had she ever been there at all, or was she a ghost planted to haunt him? He asked the neighbors, but they only shrugged and turned away, unwilling to speak, their silence even more dangerous than words. That day, his superiors called him in, asking routine questions. But he noticed something in their tone, something sharp, like they were fishing for his reactions, as if they knew something he didn't. He forced himself to act normal, to answer, casually, but his heart thumped against his ribs like a drum. Later, at a small cafe where he usually met an old informant, he found the man gone, his seat empty, his tea untouched, only a folded note left behind. With trembling fingers, he opened it. The note had only one line. The eyes are on you now. That was all, nothing more. His chest tightened. His mouth went dry. He crumpled the note, looked around wildly, but every face in that cafe stared at him as though they were waiting for him to realize the truth. He stormed out, but the paranoia only grew heavier. The next day, his phone buzzed with a strange message from an unknown number containing a picture of him entering the woman's house, time-stamped, clear, undeniable. Beneath it were 3 words: "We already know." His legs went weak, and he sat down right where he was, his mind screaming with confusion. He wanted to run to his colleagues to explain, but what explanation could he give? That he had walked into a trap? That he had secrets in his past? That his hands were not clean? Every door he considered knocking on seemed like another path into a cage. That night he drank, something he rarely did, hoping to silence the whispers in his head. But instead, the alcohol made them louder. He dreamed of the woman's face, her calm smile, her whisper echoing endlessly. And when he woke up, he found himself clutching his pistol as though it was the only thing keeping him alive. The days blurred together after that. He moved through the city like a hunted animal, every sound a threat, every corner a danger. And then came the second blow, the one that shattered whatever little resolve he had left. A sealed envelope delivered to his office, containing photographs of his family, his wife, his children, sitting in the park, walking home, living their normal lives, unaware of the storm circling them. The message attached read, "Do not resist. The net is already around you." He felt his heart crack inside his chest. It was no longer about him alone. It was about those he loved, those he had sworn to protect. He sat in his office that day, staring at the walls, knowing his badge meant nothing, his title meant nothing, and for the first time in his life, he understood what true powerlessness felt like. The woman had vanished, but her shadow lingered everywhere, and the realization was dawning clearer with every passing hour. He was not simply being investigated, he was being dismantled, piece by piece, stripped of authority, of security, of sanity, until nothing would remain but the truth he had always feared, that he was the real criminal, and the law he thought he carried had turned its teeth toward him. And as the second day closed, with the city outside alive with noise and light, he sat in darkness, trembling, whispering prayers under his breath, knowing deep inside that the coming days would drag him into depths he could not even imagine. By the time the third day began, the policeman was no longer the same man who had first knocked on that cursed woman's door. His eyes, once sharp with the authority of uniform, had become bloodshot and restless. His hands trembled even when holding a pen. His ears caught every smallest sound, as though each whisper of wind carried a message meant for him. He wore his uniform still, but now it felt like a costume stitched from lies, heavy on his body like chains. And every time he looked into the mirror, he didn't see a protector of law, but a hunted creature hiding behind badges and titles that meant nothing in the shadows he had stepped into. He told himself it was just fear, just imagination, but deep down he knew it was something more. His collapse had already started, and the woman's voice, that haunting whisper of, "You are the target," kept echoing so vividly in his mind that he almost expected to see her standing behind him whenever he turned around. On that third morning, as sunlight tried to pierce through the dusty curtains of his apartment, he awoke drenched in sweat, his pillow soaked, his chest pounding as though he had been running for miles in his sleep. The dream had returned again, the woman's face half hidden in shadow, her lips moving without sound until suddenly the whisper rang out, repeating over and over, telling him there was no escape, no hiding, that his fate was already written. He staggered out of bed, splashing cold water on his face, staring into the cracked bathroom mirror, and for a fleeting second, he swore he saw her reflection instead of his own, calm, smiling, victorious. He smashed the mirror with his fist, blood trickling down his knuckles, but even the pain could not drown the truth clawing inside his mind. He tried to focus on work, to bury himself in routine. He reported to the station, greeted his colleagues with forced smiles, laughed at meaningless jokes, filled out paperwork, but every time he caught someone's eyes lingering on him, suspicion gnawed deeper. Did they know? Did they suspect him? Already? Was his file being read, his name marked, his life weighed in secret rooms he would never see? When his superior casually asked him how his night patrol had gone, his throat tightened. It was a simple question, harmless on the surface, but it felt like a dagger hidden in silk. They knew he hadn't patrolled. They knew he had been locked, in his own apartment, gripping his pistol like a madman, whispering prayers to walls that offered no comfort. He forced a smile, answered smoothly, but inside he was breaking. By afternoon, he decided he could not remain passive. He needed answers. He drove back to the house where it had all begun, determined to find her again, to confront her, to prove to himself that she was real. But when he arrived, the street seemed emptier than before. The house stood silent, its windows boarded, its door locked with thick chains, dust gathering at the threshold. He asked neighbors, but they shrugged, eyes avoiding his, lips sealed by invisible warnings. "No one lives there," one old man muttered before quickly retreating indoors. Rage and confusion swallowed him. He went through property records, city files, archives, but the house did not exist. No registration, no taxes, no history. It was as if the place had been erased, as if the woman had been nothing more than an apparition crafted to ruin him. Yet his memories of her smile, her whisper, her chilling knowledge of his secrets were too sharp to be dreams. That night, as he sat alone in his apartment, a knock echoed against his door, 3 sharp knocks that froze him to the bone. He raised his pistol, sweat pouring into his eyes, and swung the door open. No one stood there. Only a small envelope lay on the floor, thin, innocuous, yet heavier than any weight he had ever carried. He bent down, snatched it up, slammed the door, locked it, bolted it, chained it, then ripped the envelope open with shaking hands. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear. Him, sitting in his office. Him, driving his car. Him, standing outside his children's school as they laughed, oblivious. The angles were impossible, taken from places no one should have been. His chest squeezed tight, his breath came shallow, his knees buckled. Beneath the photographs was a single line. "You belong to us now." The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. He staggered back, collapsed into a chair, staring blankly at the images. His family, his work, his secret life. All of it exposed, documented, controlled. He dropped the envelope, his gun sliding from his hand, clattering against the floor. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out, only a hollow gasp like a dying man. He crawled into the corner of his room, hugging his knees, whispering to himself like a child, "I am still the police. I still have power." But his own voice betrayed him, thin and hollow, a lie spoken too many times. Hours passed as shadows shifted across the room, and every creak of the building made him flinch. Every distant car horn made him tremble. When finally exhaustion dragged him into sleep, the dream returned stronger than ever. He was running through endless corridors, chased by faceless men, their footsteps echoing like thunder, and ahead of him stood the woman, calm and smiling, her hand raised not to help, but to signal, as though she were commanding the hunters behind him. "You cannot run," she whispered, her voice shaking the very walls. "You cannot hide. You are already ours." He fell to his knees in the dream, begging, pleading, but she only watched, her smile widening as the shadows swallowed him whole. When he jolted awake, his pillow was soaked again, his face wet with tears he could not remember shedding, and the city outside his window looked darker, heavier, like a cage of concrete and iron stretching forever. He rose slowly, legs trembling, picked up the photographs from the floor and stared at them once more. They were not dreams. They were proof. Proof that he was no longer free. Proof that he had already been claimed by forces he could neither see nor fight. The realization broke him deeper than any bullet could. He was not a policeman chasing criminals. He was the criminal now, the hunted prey in a world where hunters never missed. And as the third day drew to its end, with night spreading across the city like a black tide, the man who once believed in law sat broken in his own uniform, knowing that his fate was sealed and that the whisper would haunt him forever. "You are the target." By the 4th day, the policeman's soul had begun to rot from the inside, though his body still moved through the routines of life like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. He wore his uniform in the morning, polished his shoes, clipped his badge to his chest. But none of it mattered anymore. These were the hollow rituals of a man who knew the uniform was no shield, no armor, only a mask to hide the truth that was already written on his face. His eyes were sunken now, ringed with shadows that betrayed sleepless nights. His hands trembled even as he tried to hold a cup of tea, and his voice cracked when he spoke to colleagues who pretended not to notice but exchanged glances when they thought he wasn't looking. The whispers in the corridors of the station felt louder now, almost purposeful, as though each word was aimed at him. He walked into rooms and conversations stopped. He left, and they began again, the laughter sharp and cruel. He tried to convince himself it was paranoia, but every detail lined up too perfectly to be dismissed. By mid-morning, another envelope appeared on his desk. No one saw who placed it there, or perhaps everyone had and no one admitted it. He opened it with his heart hammering, and inside were not photographs this time, but transcripts. Words, sentences, recordings of his own conversations, things he had said years ago in secret meetings, things he had promised to people whose names he dared not speak. He felt the blood drain from his face as he read his own voice on the page. Undeniable, damning. They had everything, every word, every secret. And then at the bottom, scrawled in the same chilling hand as before, "Do not resist." The walls are already closing in. He stuffed the papers into his jacket, unable to breathe, his mind spinning. That day passed in a blur, the city outside moving like a world he no longer belonged to. People laughed, argued, bargained in markets. Children played, traffic horns blared, but to him it was all distant, muted, like a play on a stage he was no longer a part of. He felt himself drifting between two worlds, the world of the living and the world of the hunted. By evening, he went to see his family, desperate for comfort, for proof that something real still existed. He sat with his children, listened to their innocent chatter, held his wife's hand as she asked about his day. But even there, in the warmth of home, shadows stretched long. He kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see a face staring in. He hugged his children too tightly, his wife asking if something was wrong, but he shook his head, forcing a smile. How could he tell them that their lives were already under the gaze of unseen eyes, that their safety was nothing but an illusion? After dinner, when he stepped outside to smoke, he found another message pinned to his car windshield. A simple note. "They are ours too, if you fail." His hand shook so violently he almost dropped it, his cigarette falling to the ground. He burned the note immediately, but the words burned deeper into his mind, carving themselves into his very bones. That night, he did not sleep at home. He drove aimlessly through the city, parking in different streets, changing directions at random as though movement alone could save him. But every turn of the wheel only confirmed the truth. He was being followed, not by one, not by two, but by countless invisible watchers who needed no vehicles, no faces. They were simply everywhere. He checked his mirrors, his rear window, but sometimes the streets behind him were empty, and that emptiness terrified him more than if cars had been tailing him. He ended up on the outskirts of the city, parking by a deserted field, his hands clutching the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. There, in the darkness, he broke. Tears poured down his face, sobs shaking his body, his pistol heavy in his lap. He pressed it to his temple, his finger trembling on the trigger, whispering to himself that one shot could end it, one shot could give him peace. But then his phone buzzed. A message. He nearly dropped it, but when he opened it, his breath froze. It was a live photograph, his children sleeping in their beds, time-stamped minutes ago. His stomach twisted violently, bile rising in his throat. They were in his house, watching, controlling, owning. His gun slipped from his hand. There was no escape, not for him, not for them. He drove back in a frenzy, burst into the house, but his children were there, sleeping peacefully. His wife curled beside them. No sign of intruders. Yet the image on his phone was proof enough. He sank into a chair, shaking, staring at them, whispering prayers like a broken man. The dawn crept in slowly, painting the sky with pale light. But for him, it was not a new day, only another stage in his captivity. On the fourth morning, as the sun rose, the policeman finally understood that he was no longer a man, no longer a father, no longer an officer. He was property. Property of those who had ensnared him, property of the woman whose whisper had cursed him, property of a faceless power that had written his fate long before he knocked on her door. And as he stared at the rising sun, his face wet with tears, his soul whispered the truth he could no longer deny. He belonged to them now, body, mind, and spirit. By the fifth day, the policeman's world was no longer stitched together by logic, duty, or law. It had unraveled into threads of fear, shadows, and whispers that only he seemed to hear. Yet he knew others could hear them too, because every glance, every half-smile, every cough from the men in his department now carried secret meanings, like code passed in plain sight. His body had become a vessel of exhaustion, his hands shaky, his skin pale, his uniform loose as though it no longer belonged to him. He stopped shaving, his eyes bloodshot, but even in the mirror he no longer recognized his reflection. It stared back at him like a stranger, eyes hollow, mouth twitching, as if mocking him. He tried splashing cold water on his face, tried muttering to himself that he was still an officer of the law, still a man with authority, but the illusion cracked, further each time. On this fifth morning, as he left the station, he noticed an unmarked black car parked across the street. He froze, his breath halting, his heart racing. Two figures sat inside, silhouettes only, unmoving, watching. He forced himself to walk away, but every window he passed reflected the same truth. Their eyes were on him, even when their faces were obscured. He walked faster, then broke into a half-run, but no matter where he turned, when he looked back, the car was still there, sometimes behind him, sometimes ahead, sometimes waiting at the corner before he even arrived. His mind screamed at him that he was trapped in a net that tightened every time he struggled. When he finally returned home, he found the front door ajar. Terror struck him like a hammer. He stormed inside with his weapon drawn, his heart pounding, only to find everything in perfect order. The chairs, the pictures, the books, nothing out of place. Yet on the dining table lay a single glass of water, still cold, with droplets sliding down the surface, as if someone had just poured it. His wife swore she had placed no such glass there. He smashed it to the ground, the shards scattering across the floor, his children startled by the sudden violence. He apologized, stammering excuses, but deep down he knew it was a message. We were here. We can enter any time. That evening, his colleagues summoned him to a late-night meeting. He entered the dimly lit room to find their faces grim, their words calculated. They asked him questions, ordinary questions about his work, but the tone was different. They wanted confirmation, confessions hidden behind casual inquiries. He answered carefully, but his sweat betrayed him, dripping down his temple, his collar soaked. One officer leaned close, his eyes narrowing, and whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "You already belong to them, don't you?" The words stabbed his soul, leaving him speechless. He left the room trembling, realizing there was no one left to trust, no ally in this world, only actors in a grand play where he was the sacrifice. That night, when he tried to sleep, the dreams returned, dreams of the woman, her face shifting. Between beauty and horror, her eyes glowing like embers, her voice whispering commands in a language older than time. She stood in his room beside his bed, her shadow stretching across the walls, her breath chilling the air. He woke gasping, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding, only to find his window wide open though he had locked it earlier. On the sill lay a single feather, black as midnight, and beside it a note that read, "Soon." He staggered backward, clutching his chest, unable to breathe. The feather felt like a curse, a seal of fate. He hid it away, but the word kept echoing in his skull. Soon. 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 By dawn, his sanity was cracking. He sat in his car, unable to drive, staring at his own trembling hands, whispering prayers mixed with curses. He no longer cared about the law, about justice, about his badge. He only cared about survival, but survival was no longer his to claim. He was a marked man, a pawn on a board he never understood, and every move he made only brought him closer to checkmate. As the sun rose on the 5th day, painting the city in light, he realized that the light no longer belonged to him. He was swallowed by a darkness deeper than night. And in that darkness, he heard her voice again, inside his head, clear and merciless. You were never free. You were always ours. It was a stormy night when the final truth tore away the last veil of illusions. The policeman, broken, sleepless, carrying the weight of paranoia, cornered the woman in a dim, abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. His weapon shook in his hand as he demanded the truth, his voice raw, his eyes bloodshot. She did not run, did not resist. Instead, she smiled with a coldness that froze his blood. You were never hunting me, she whispered, her tone sharp like a blade. I was hunting you. I am ISI, and every step you took was under my watch. The words detonated in his skull like thunder. His knees weakened, his grip faltered. But before he could reply, another figure entered. The girl he had thought of as innocent, fragile, a mere witness to his downfall. She stood frozen, her eyes darting between them, her face pale with disbelief. You're not a victim, she gasped at the woman. And you? She turned slowly toward the policeman, her voice trembling. You are the criminal, all along. The silence that followed was heavier than death. The policeman's heart shattered. Every denial died in his throat. He tried to plead, to explain, but the woman's laughter silenced him. The girl stepped back, her trust destroyed, the truth burning her innocence. In that final moment, the policeman realized there was no escape. The woman had unmasked herself as the predator, and the girl had unmasked him as the hunted monster. Surrounded by truth on both sides, he understood his fate. There would be no redemption, no forgiveness, only exposure. The last sound in the warehouse was not his gun, not his words, but the echo of the woman's final whisper, "We never lose, we only reveal."